Dr. Bjarne Wernicke-Olesen, who is a research lecturer and tutor at the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies, teaching Sanskrit, Pali, and Hinduism for the Theology and Religion faculty. And he's research director and manager for the Śākta Traditions Research Programme at the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies. Bjarne is a rare scholar, in my view, who combines the philological study of Sanskrit texts with higher level reflection on what it all means and how it relates not only to historical questions, but also to philosophical questions about the nature of the person and how traditions conceptualize human purposes, really. So his book publications include an introduction to Hinduism, translations of the famous Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, and the less famous, but perhaps almost as important, Hatha Pradipika. And he has a Danish Sanskrit grammar and reader in 2 volumes. And he's the editor of the goddess traditions in Tantric Hinduism. So it's quite an achievement, I think. He's also written a number of articles on Shaktism, yoga, and Tantra in Danish, German, and English. Not only does Bjarne read texts from manuscript sources, and his work on the manuscript library at Kathmandu should be mentioned in this context, but he also has mastery of the secondary literature in a number of European languages, particularly German Indological scholarship, more easily facilitated due to his German-Danish bilingualism. And I should mention that I'm very proud to have Bjarne as a wonderful colleague, and we're intending to produce an edition and a critical translation of a medieval Sanskrit text, the scripture of the eye. The eye seems to be cropping up through our conference here, or the Nature Tantra. And I was thinking of our discussion yesterday about being seen, or God's sight, giving being. And I think it links in with Nicholas's lecture too that we've just heard. So I think there are certain themes there that we can develop. So today Bjarne is going to speak to us on the topic of orders of discourse and levels of phenomenology in the study of religions, the conceptual modeling of religious tradition and its anthropology in medieval India. So Bjarne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gavin, for that opening introduction. I'll try to share the screen with you. Did that work? Good. So, as encouraged by Professor Satoko Fujibara in her talk, I should perhaps begin this presentation by saying that I speak from the perspective of a historian of religion rather than that of a philosopher. So my concern here is the descriptive, typological, and hermeneutic phenomenology of religion and its applicability in the service of the history of religions, as well as the general and comparative study of religion, rather than philosophical phenomenology. And furthermore, my approach here may be said to be that of meta-theory, posing questions to the context of inquiry and the nature of inquiry and the kinds of interests represented in our inquiry. As it has been mentioned, the phenomenology of religion has fallen into disrepute at many departments for the study of religions, where it only plays a minor role nowadays, or has even gone incognito due to the heavy postmodern and post-colonial critique and subsequent unpopularity of such terms as comparative and phenomenology. So I consider myself fortunate in a sense to have been provided with a background in the phenomenology of religion from the Department for the Study of Religion at Aarhus University, where the Scandinavian typological phenomenology or building block approach is still considered a fundamental discipline for the general and comparative study of religion, and not least thanks to the efforts of Professor Jeppe Sending Jensen, whose work has been a source of inspiration and who was also presenting at this conference. And furthermore, I consider myself quite fortunate to be at a research center in Oxford specializing in Hindu studies, where the phenomenological approach continues to play such a central role. thanks to Gavin and my colleagues, Dr. Jessica Fraser and Dr. Lucian Wong, who are also contributing. So yes, I certainly think it makes good sense to maintain the term phenomenology of religion for various reasons, and also to continue to develop the field in the sense of a new phenomenology of religion with a focus on philosophical anthropology, and indeed to apply this approach in more specialized disciplines such as Hindu studies in order to contribute to what one may refer to as a fruitful hermeneutical loop between the particular and the more general and comparative study of religion. The best answer to the question, what is phenomenology of religion, may very well be the counter question who is asking. So in my understanding as a linguist, the phenomenology of religion is basically the origin and provider of our academic language, that is our inventory of conceptual and analytical models for the study of religious phenomena. In other words, it is the foundational comparative field where the concepts, the models, typologies, etc., originate and are developed for the purpose of the study of religion and religions, and for understanding what religion in the singular actually is. So after all, it's difficult to study something when you're not quite sure what exactly you are studying. So without an understanding of religion, it is difficult to perceive something as religious. So one of the common misunderstandings is, of course, to confuse the concept with the phenomenon, and to think that one can avoid the discussion by simply speaking of religions in the plural, such as Hinduisms and Buddhisms and so on. So without the phenomenology of religion, we may, in a sense, only be able to study and see differences. The study of religion would not be possible, really. Only the study of particular traditions, which we would hardly be able to define as religious or religions. So basically, religious phenomena is what one encounters when one studies religion, and I think it should be emphasized that religious phenomenon is a concrete appearance understood in a certain way. Phenomenology of religion therefore tends to ask what it is that shows itself, and if it is religious, it thus focuses on the intellectual object, on letting be seen what shows itself in a Heideggerian sense, while philosophical phenomenology, on the other hand, perhaps tends to focus more on the conditions for human cognition, how phenomena show themselves to the subject, and the relationship between the intellectual object and the subject perceiver, or in other words, the interplay between what shows itself and the subject to whom it shows itself. So expressed in a somewhat simplified manner, phenomenology of religion and philosophical phenomenology both take what shows itself as their point of departure, but apart from that, they often may not have that much in common. At least this holds true for the more descriptive and typological phenomenology of religion prevalent in Scandinavia. So the danger, one may say, is a kind of philosophical naivety. How can the researcher be certain to know what shows itself and why he or she thinks that it shows itself? This is where the philosophical phenomenology may perhaps aid or even come to the rescue of phenomenology of religion. The study of religions is therefore grounded in and highly dependent on the common and ongoing discussion and development of our shared scientific concepts within the field of phenomenology of religion. Sometimes these concepts are problematized to a degree where the study of religion looks more like the study of a catalogue of problems rather than the study of a well-defined intellectual object, namely religion. As pointed out, our inventory or scientific conceptual models create the religious phenomena that we study through analysis. And I'm here taking a somewhat an epistemological and social constructionist stance, in the sense that these conceptual models constitute the building blocks for our understanding of what religion is made up of. So facts in this sense are are fabricated and do not speak for themselves. In Sanskrit terms, they're not simply data or givens, but krita constructed, or even Sanskrita. They are cultural constructions. In other words, in the phenomenology of religion, it is our conceptual models that allow what shows itself to be seen as religious phenomena in order for these to be studied scientifically. So this may be facilitated through methods such as fieldwork or philology, as Gavin has suggested. So thus, if we take philology to be the study of civilization through its texts, then we may say that a civilization can show itself through its texts, and philology allows it to be seen. Furthermore, phenomenology of religion allows it to be seen as religious, as a religious civilization, a network of traditions made up of a conglomerate of different religious phenomena, such as myths, rituals, worship, pilgrimage, etc. Our conceptual models are therefore highly theory-dependent and sensitive abstractions. That is, they depend on new theory formations, definitions, typologies, etc. And they exist in dependent origination, if you like, and are closely related to research history. So we have a triadic relationship. They can therefore not be defined or studied independently, but need to be established and defined on an analytical level in relation to each other. And we therefore need a field that is in the constant discussion and communication. So speaking from my own field of interest, it is difficult to study something like Hindu Śāktism as a religious tradition in South Asia without first establishing what is meant by such terms as religion, tradition, Hinduism, ritual, imaginary, and so on. So it is therefore obvious that the study of religion shares many concerns with linguistics, and that this can be, and indeed has been, a model science for the study of religions, especially after the linguistic turn and the shift in contemporary theoretical discourse from a philosophy of consciousness to a philosophy of design. Now, when we study the history of religions, we primarily study the continuity and change of traditions through time. And since we are not merely describing the world as it is in itself, but rather letting be seen that which shows itself by creating knowledge of it through our conceptual models, questions of phenomenology and modeling directly influence the way we study these traditions and also what we understand them to be. There are, however, different types of conceptual models that operate on different analytical levels with different theoretical objects and epistemic goals. And these analytical levels correspond to different levels of phenomenology within the order of discourse, that is the study of religions as formulated by Gavin in relation to this conference. I may add a biographical note that I'm trained as both an Indologist and a historian of religion, so coming from a department for putting small things on top of other things to a department for comparing anything with everything, this has motivated me to reflect a bit on the different epistemic interests and different analytical levels that we are operating on. Come up with this model here. So I'd argue that most of the things that Indology and the study of religions tend to work on different analytical and phenomenological levels in their approach to modeling religious traditions, and that this has resulted in and also explains quite different writings of the history of Indian religions. And I will try to illustrate this point in relation to the conceptual modeling of goddess traditions in medieval India, or what has become known as Hindu Śāktism, and what may be referred to as its vertical push-pull Shakta anthropology. But to perhaps complexify and thereby hopefully clarify things a bit, I've come up with this model of models. In 2006, Gavin wrote an article reflecting on tradition and inquiry in the study of religions in the Journal of the American Academy of Religion. And this article, he suggests that one way of understanding religious studies is to look at three orders of discourse and different forms of reasoning. And I've taken this model as a point of departure and related it to other models of levels of phenomenology, the insider-outsider dichotomy, the imagetic distinction, etc., as they are frequently being referred to in the discourse of the comparative study of religions, in order to provide an overview and perhaps to analyze for some problems and challenges. The first order discourse, understood in this context, comprises tradition itself and is related to primary revelation in the form of religious experience and practice. And the primary articulation of tradition is its texts expressed and integrated in practices of repetition. So this order of discourse exists outside of any academic enterprise. It represents the tradition internal point of view and is sometimes referred to as the local discourse, folk models, lived experience, and so on. The second order discourse is the reflection of tradition upon itself. As Bjarne has expressed it in relation to Indian traditions, the researcher is often studying traditions that have already studied themselves. So this is theology in the sense of tradition studying itself according to first order religious standards expressed in commentaries and exegesis and ritual manuals based on the textual revelation. It performs forms of reasoning within the boundaries set by the primary articulation and offers corrective readings of that tradition. One may say that it is the centripetal force of the norma-normator correcting and keeping the centrifugal forces of the norma-normans in place. It is, in principle, apologetic, normative, and tradition internal reasoning. A third order discourse is a form of reasoning about first and second order discourse. Then it may be specific and particular, such as Indology or the history of religions, or it may be general and comparative, such as comparative religion or the study of religion in the singular. So it refers to forms of secular reasoning, disciplines, methods and methodologies developed within the Western academy. So religious studies, comparative religion, and so on is a third order discourse, or rather a series of third order discourses comprising such fields as sociology of religion, philosophy of religion, Indology, and phenomenology of religion that stands outside of its objects of study in offering different kinds of descriptions and accounts to a second order discourse, and present often contradicting or competing explanations of traditions. So the third order discourse in this sense is an outsider perspective. From the perspective of the study of religion, both emic and ethic models are therefore outsider models. That is, they participate in a critical, analytical, and externalist third order academic discourse. The distinction emic-ethic is therefore not analogous to the insider-outsider dichotomy. And since this is somewhat common misunderstanding, I'll quickly refer to the linguistic origins of these neologisms as formulated by Kenneth Pike. The concepts emic and ethic are based on the linguistic distinction between phonemic and phonetic, and phonemic analysis is looking at the sound system of a specific language, while phonetics is a branch of linguistics that studies how humans in general produce and perceive sounds. So in order to analyze specific languages from the perspective of phonemics and phonetics and to compare them, a third order scientific meta-language and conceptual framework is therefore necessary. So phonetic and phonemic analysis are both representative of an outsider perspective and an outsider discourse. So looking at disciplines, the distinction between emic and ethic is also analogous to the distinction between philology and comparative linguistics, and between specialized disciplines such as Indology and the comparative study of religions. In the study of religions, ethic models are analytical constructions and ideal types in the Weberian sense created by the scholarly imagination for comparative purposes, such as religion, axis mundi, the truth within, rite de passage, or verticality. Emic models, on the other hand, are also analytical constructions, but refer to a particular religious tradition, cultural system, discourse, etc., in a particular cultural context. So emic models are thus based on the external critical analysis of the native's point of view, folk models, and they are externalist in the sense that they are drawing on this tradition external third order ethic language developed through comparison. And these emic models may or may not contradict with the insider's view. This, of course, also implies that cultural insiders are equally capable of producing emic and ethic accounts of their own culture when participating in and translating into a third order discourse, which Hindu studies may be taken as an example of. In addition, emic and ethic models may be said to serve different epistemic interests. They do not represent different epistemologies, but different interests. And if we apply a distinction between subject matter and theoretical object in relation to the emic models of Indology, contrasting them with the ethic models of comparative religion, these differences become quite clear. And Indology has its theoretical object religion in South Asia. We may therefore say that there's often very little difference between the subject matter and the theoretical object of Indology. But on the other hand, the subject matter of ethic models is the comparison of emic models with the theoretical object being religion in general, aiming at the production of a third order meta-theory and meta-language, which may then again be applied to specific emic models. Thus, we often have a distance between the subject matter and the theoretical object in relation to ethic models. And this may perhaps be illustrated by a linguistic example. Sanskrit, taken as a holy language, may represent a first order discourse, while the indigenous grammatical tradition associated with the grammarian Bjarne represents a second order discourse, namely the tradition studying itself and producing tradition internal models such as the Sandhi rules for euphonic combination of sounds between words, which we have here on the screen, and the typology of compound words. So these indigenous models have been studied by tradition external philologians as emic models, and have been adopted by linguistics and become part and parcel of the comparative linguistic metalanguage. And this way, indigenous models have been filtered through several analytical layers and have been theorized in order to function in a broader comparative context. So linguistic models such as Sandhi rules and the typology of compounds, maintaining the original Sanskrit terms such as bahurihi and dvandva, are now being used by Western comparative linguistics to explain phenomena, including in non-Indo-European languages such as Japanese. So we thus have a development from homological and genealogical models to typological and analogical models. And in the case of the phenomenology of religion, one may mention examples such as totemism, ritual, and indeed the term religion itself. So in this way, a third order meta-language may very well include and be informed by adopting and developing tradition internal conceptual models for use in a broader comparative context, but only when they are sort of translated into a third order discourse. And in this sense, emic models form the basis for scientific comparison and the resulting ethic models. Finally, the emic and ethic analytical levels in this sense are analogous to the two levels of phenomenology, I would argue referred to as first and second level phenomenology, or descriptive and hermeneutic phenomenology. The first level, or descriptive phenomenology, is in itself a dialogical enterprise, as formulated by Gavin, where the texts and topics of comparison are brought together in the scholar's mind for a particular reason, namely a theoretical object, which is an emic model based on genealogical and homological comparison. So this is based on texts and fieldwork whose showing itself is facilitated by scientific methodology, such as philology and ethnography. However, after describing what is there, we are left with the task of theorizing what shows itself to us. And this is then the second level hermeneutic phenomenology. It may also be seen as a second type of dialogical enterprise, where the theoretical object is now an etic model based on typological and analogical comparison. So as we've seen in previous examples, this may indeed be an intercultural endeavor, since it is potentially transformative through the adoption of other and new ways of thinking, and that is through the adoption of indigenous conceptual models. When a phenomenology of religion is formulated as a discipline whose intellectual object is the integration of text into practice, then that would correspond with an emic model, but looking at the consequent aspiration to verticality thereby entailed, that would be an etic model. However, when verticality is formulated as a philosophical anthropology, we are taking on a third or further level within a third order discourse, which may be the philosophy of religion, a level of questions of truth and ontological inquiry, as it has been formulated elsewhere. However, we may also go the other way around and deploy phenomenology of verticality in the service of historical explanation. So I would argue when phenomenology of religion is operating with ethic models, they are ideal types, and they are therefore neither diachronic nor synchronic, but achronic, in the sense they are ignoring the situatedness of religious phenomena in time, place, and context. However, the varieties of phenomena in time, place, and context are, of course, not random and arbitrary, but dependent on the historical development of cultures and religions. So a phenomenology of religion as a philosophical anthropology may in one sense entail the danger of extrapolating verticality to be a common human characteristic, that is of a homo religiosus, and would also imply that the phenomenon of verticality or vertical pull would be likely to show itself everywhere at any given time and place where we find humans. However, as the work of Axial Age thinkers such as Robert Bellah, Eisenstadt, Assmann, Sloterdijk, and lately Habermas and others would indicate that the phenomenon of vertical pull may very well be said to be a characteristic of a certain type of religion, axial religion, in this discourse as and subsequently post-axial religion, as opposed to previous forms of religion, which we may refer to as archaic and tribal religion. So this critical distinction between what has been variously termed as Segensreligion, Gnadenreligion, archaic religion versus cosmological religion, or locative religion versus utopian religion, in terms of Jonathan C. Smith, enters the stage of the history of religions at a certain time, somewhere around the middle of the first millennium BC. So this so-called axial age of religious transition in different world civilizations, as pointed out by Robert Bellah and Hermann Kuhlke and others in relation to India, well, it may be said that one of the key features of this age of criticism and reflexivity was the development of a theoretic culture defined by a capacity to examine one's own assumptions and indeed for questioning all human activity and conferring upon it a new meaning, in the words of Karl Jaspers. So in northern India, around the time of the Buddha, in the middle of the first millennium BC, we see this rise of new ascetic movements and traditions. And these were often quite radical and diverse renounced traditions, including Buddhists and Jains and lesser known traditions such as materialists and skeptics. And these movements of wandering ascetics or strivers, Shramana, they initiated a highly formative period in Indian religious history, marking the transition from the Vedic religion to classical Hinduism. And it has been termed variously the ascetic reformism by Axel Michaels, the formative period of Indian religions by Patrick Olivelle, and India's Axial Age by Hermann Kulke. So while one should keep in mind that this kind of periodization is always analytically determined and decided by our theoretical underpinnings and empirical interests, it's useful in emphasizing an important breakthrough or shift in the history of religions, which may otherwise run the risk of being trivialized in more particular and specialized studies. So I think this may therefore serve as a prime example of a contribution by a phenomenology of verticality to the history of religions, and perhaps also as an example of what the Professor Fujiwara suggested as a way to rehabilitate and update phenomenology of religion as philosophical anthropology. Namely, here I quote, by synthesizing universalism and contextualism into a context-conscious philosophical anthropology in which answers to what it is to be human proliferate, reflecting different historical and social contexts. End of quote. So, and it is in this period of ascetic reformism in India that we find the first systematic developments of yoga and meditation, as well as classical formulations of key concepts and values in Indian religions, such as the notions of karma and rebirth, the notion of an inner truth and vertical liberation as the goal of human existence. So, returning to the model of discourses, we may add academic theology as an exception that proves the rule. It is both a second and a third order discourse, in the sense that it is reflecting on Christian traditions, but sharing the method of rational analysis and practices of reasoning developed within the secular academy. However, as opposed to academic theology, which is clearly operating within a third order academic discourse, I would like to use this overlap to point to what may be termed a gray zone in descriptive phenomenology. This is the case when philology and ethnography use a highly descriptive and neutral approach, where compliance with the internal point of view is often taken as authoritative and a criterion of validity. And often this implies that the tradition internal terminology has a primacy over the tradition external third order meta-language. And this may in fact result in the uncritical reproduction of tradition internal models as seemingly objective third order emic models. And since tradition internal models are often normative and apologetic, they sometimes result in a kind of crypto-theological emic models that are inconsistent and contradictory. And again, I'd like to use a linguistic example first, which may be helpful in illustrating this point. The model of upload or vowel gradation in Sanskrit has 3 steps. We have zero grade, guna, and riti. And in the traditional Paninian model, the second and third step of vowel gradation is arrived at through strengthening the vowel. However, comparative linguistics has shown us that zero grade is indeed not the point of departure. Instead, guna is the point of departure, and zero grade is arrived at through weakening the vowel, and riti is arrived at through strengthening the vowel. So in Western Sanskrit grammars, we therefore find 2 contradictory emic models of the vowel gradation scheme. One that is directly taken over from the indigenous grammatical tradition and has zero grade as a point of departure, and another model which is the comparative and scientific model having guna as a point of departure. So the latter is therefore in opposition to the tradition internal point of view, and indeed going against the grammarian Panini may be close to blasphemy in the traditional Indian setting, at least as I experienced it when studying with a Pandit in India, who became violent at this point. So my point is now that we may find similar inconsistencies in the academic discourse concerning the study of religions, and I'll try to quickly illustrate this in relation to the mapping of Indian religious traditions, where we have competing emic models. This may have a major impact on the writing of the history of Indian religions, as becomes evident in the case of the Indian goddess tradition, referred to as Shaktism. So when looking at introductions, handbooks, encyclopedias, etc., to Hinduism, one is struck by the fact that there does not seem to be a consensus whether there are 2 or 3 major Hindu traditions. We are speaking of one more or less tradition with hundreds of millions of followers going back to the middle of the first millennium CE. So the tradition in question is that of the great goddess Devi and her many manifestations. Shaktism is less easy to define than the other major Hindu traditions, and it can be surprisingly difficult to discern this tradition from Shaivism in its tantric forms. So according to some scholars of Indian religions, Shaktism is first and foremost an esoteric development within medieval tantric Shaivism, a subsect and a form of feminized Shaivism, sometimes also referred to as Hindu Tantrism par excellence. And the 2 opposing views of this tradition as either a major Hindu tradition or a subsect of Shaivism often seems to mirror the approach of the history of religions and Puranic studies versus that of textual Indology and tantric studies. And as an example, it may look like this. So here we have the point expressed in 2 dictionaries, that there are 3 major Hindu traditions, namely that Shaktism, together with Vaishnavism and Shaivism, is one of the major forms of Hinduism practiced today. So we have taken Merriam-Webster and Wikipedia, and looking at a popular introduction to Hinduism representing the Indological point of view. We have here the 2 major theistic Hindu traditions related to the deities, Vishnu and Shiva, and we have the goddess tradition presented as a subsect of Shaivism, of sectarian Shaivism here. However, we have seen lately a movement away from this view of Shaktism as a purely internal development within Shaivism, and thus a subsect of Shaivism, towards viewing the tantric goddess traditions as an independent system and tradition. In Indological terms, this is formulated as viewing the Kulamarga of tantric Shaktism as an independent tradition, contrasting it with that of the mantra marga or tantric Shaivism. So what happened? The view changed from reproducing tradition internal models to formulating a critical analytical tradition external emic model, and the impetus for this was given by the Indologist Alexis Sanderson and expressed in the following way in his keynote in 2011. So here we have that presented as a radical revision or extension of the work in this field. What has been hitherto represented as a more elevated mystical tradition within Shaivism is indeed so seen from the perspective of later Shaiva practitioners. So it is the internal model, but it is also a very archaic and independent Shakta tradition from the outside, which has been preserved in spite of various attempts at reformation and assimilation. So this is the emic outsider model. And this results in a new modeling of Shaktism in relation to Hinduism that would look like this, where we have Shaktism as one of the 3 or 4 major Hindu traditions, and we are also able to analyze forth the overlap between tantric Shaktism and tantric Shaivism that marks the area of confusion, and to see now the tantric goddess traditions as an index of a larger and major Hindu tradition. So this this is more adequate in the sense that it plays with other models in the field. So it constitutes a model building of a major Hindu tradition, a conceptual and also composite model. So this is a discovered cultural model that has been theorized to be used in broader comparative contexts, but still, say, within the same cultural sphere. So it's still genealogical. Emic models like this are therefore based on the external and critical analysis of tradition internal models by drawing on a third order ethic language. So they may or may not contradict with the insider's view and folk models. They form the scientific basis for comparison and ethic models, which again inform and influence our study of particular phenomena and the formulation of new emic models. So this is what I would refer to as a fruitful loop illustrated here between the emic and ethic levels and between a first and second level phenomenology. I think time does not allow us to go very deep into the vertical anthropology of Shaktism, but I'll make the simple points here that recent Indological research has shown that we sometimes find two yogic anthropologies existing side by side in tantric texts on yoga, such as the Netra Tantra and the Hatha Pradipika. And this discovery was again based on the shift from an internal model to a more critical and analytical and tradition external emic model. And in this model, we find that one anthropology is oriented towards pushing a dormant energy up the central axis of the body, a practice that's later become known as Kundalini Yoga. And when the energy reaches the top of the head, it results in a liberation from this world. However, the other anthropology is what may be termed as Śākta anthropology, where the energy is first pushed up through the central channel and then pulled down again from the top of the head, drenching the body in divine elixir on its way down, resulting in immortality, supernatural powers, and liberation in this world. So one may describe and categorize the first anthropology as axial, as ascetic and otherworldly oriented, while the second model is post-axial, ascetic and this worldly oriented. So both anthropologies are expressions of a vertical phenomenology, although they are in direct opposition to each other. And I think we have the Śākta anthropology, but I think I should stop here.